Here we have what we call a badger. And really they are a nuisance on land because in the wintertime they can dig a whole bunch of holes on frozen ground, and your pasture or your land is full of badger holes when they have a badger around. And they're just a little tiny animal, but they are mean and they're tough, because I've seen big dogs fight them a little while and they take off from them. They have those long claws, you know, they have their power to dig in the frozen ground. And I've seen the dog was all scratched up, and that's why the dogs take off them. They couldn't do nothing with them. And they're tough to kill, because you can drive over them with the car and they'll run off. You know, they must be awfully hard to kill. When we were trapping them, we would shoot them with a rifle. Well, that would kill them, but otherwise they're pretty hard to kill. And then we have some great horned owls there. Now they are protected, but these were shot. One dates way back to 1928, when there was no protection. They stuffed them, and we can keep them. And these are what we call albino pheasants. They're very rare. The game wardens say there's probably 1 in a million that's white. They like to keep them colorful, so they advise the hunters to shoot them if they see a white one, because they like them colorful. And here we have something that goes with the cheese factory. Like this is all equipment that they use. Take a little sample of the milk when they bring it in. Nowadays they sell the milk in bulk. Take a little sample to get the amount of butter fat in the milk, and the testing equipment. And then they made cheese out of it. And this is what that little wire in here, they'd cut the cheese like that in slices. And they could cut big chunks of cheese and just keep slicing it. They put that right on top and pull it over and give about a 2.5-inch cut of cheese. And this is what, when the farmers brought the milk in, the cream to town. In the early days it was separated, the cream was separated from the milk, and the farmers sold the milk, and they sold the cream and the milk, they kept at home fed it to the pigs or the calves. But when a farmer brought a can of cream in, they'd open it up and mix it good, and then take a little sample and put it into that little cream tester. And when that was done spinning, they'd know the amount of butter fat that was in the cream. And they paid according to the amount of butter fat was in. Like if your cream tested 30, it was passable, but it brought quite a bit less money than if you had, say, a 36 or even a 40 test. Of course, if you had a 40 test cream, you had less cream to bring than if you had a 30 test. So it probably came out the same way, but they paid according to the amount of butter fat that was in the cream. And there's a separator, a cream separator that would do the job of separating the cream from the milk. You got the cream from the milk. And that you had to turn by hand. Later on, they had electric. After electricity, they had electric separators that you didn't have to turn.
Did your family sell cream in town?
They sold cream to town, yeah. I remember when the family was, most of the brothers were home, that we'd milk up to 15, 20 cows. So we had probably sometimes 3 cans of cream a week to take to town.
Where would you store the cream?
We stored it down the basement. So when the cream can was full, they had to carry it up the basement. Nowadays that would be quite a job. A 10-gallon cream can, for a young guy it's okay, but that's not that easy to go up the steps. You got to hold it up so high in order to you walk with it. It's not that it's so heavy, but The handles are way up there, and then you got to keep it high enough so you can go.
What are we looking at right here?
This is what we call a bobsled. It has a regular wagon box on, and then the runners are for when there's snow, and that's why it's called a sled. And it was used in the wintertime when there was a lot of snow, and they could use that for everything. They'd haul wheat to the elevator in the town, and they'd drive to the town to do their business, and to church, and to school, whatever they needed it for. And it was pulled with 2 horses. And a sled rolled real nice, because when the snow was usually quite even, and once you had a track that was so even, it rode nice, just as nice as anything. And the wagon was always bumpy, you know, it's rough and hits a rock or anything, but the sled on the snow, that rode nice. I know my dad liked to haul the wheat to town in the wintertime with a sled once. They had a good trail. Why, he said that was so easy on the horses, according to a wagon.
Were you ever caught in a big snowstorm in a sled?
Not really caught outside, no. I know when we went to school and a snowstorm came up, but we also had a little barn where we could store the horses, so the horses were in that barn all day, and we didn't have to worry if there was a snowstorm. The horses would go home.
Okay.
But we did get caught in snowstorms sometimes.
All right. And what are these coats here?
That's what we call the sheep-lined coat. It's made out of sheep wool or hides or whatever. It's called a sheep-lined coat. And they're warm in the wintertime, and they're heavy, but they usually wore them on the sled. And they didn't put them on until the horses hitched and were ready to go, because they couldn't do nothing with those heavy coats, especially some of the heavier coats. The fur coats, you know, they were even heavier than the sheep-lined coats.
Were these coats store-bought or were they handmade?
They were store-bought. Everything, all of these were store-bought. I haven't heard of anybody making a coat like that. I don't think they could do it without equipment. Okay. Here we have a coat that's made out of bear skin. And that's a heavy coat. It's also real warm, but it's really heavy. And we have another one here made out of buffalo hide. And that's the same thing, a heavy coat and a warm coat.
When your family went to church in a sled, would they lay blankets underneath this?
I know my mother would sit on a seat like that. They had the seat inside, and she'd sit on that, and probably some of the smaller children. And the others would stand. And as long as, if at all possible, we'd stand. We were supposed to sit down and stay covered, but that usually didn't last. There's a coat that's made out of raccoon skin. It's a nice warm coat too, and a good coat. I think they were quite expensive from what I remember. I can't quote any prices, but the fur coats were quite expensive. Because I can imagine how many coons it would take to make a coat, and coons had a good price when I grew up.
Did you ever have to wear your brother's old coats?
Oh yes, everything was handed down.
How often did they get new coats?
When it goes to coats, I don't know, but I know since I was the youngest of the boys and the smallest, as the others were older, I didn't get a suit until when I got confirmed. I got a complete suit. That was my first suit that I got, and the others, I think, before that were handed down. Didn't think nothing of it.
Did your mom make the rest of your clothes, or were they store-bought as well?
Well, they were store-bought mostly. They bought overhauls, they bought suits, you know, and everybody had, you know, every one of the brothers had coat, but if once they outgrew them, and if they were still good, the next one got them. But then I was the last one, so after me, I don't know what they did with the clothes once I grew out of them.
What type of shoes did you wear?
What kind of shoes? Mm-hmm. Well, for work shoes, you know, just regular work shoes, like probably that high a shoe. And then for dress, you know, on Sundays, we had those shoes, a lot like now, dress shoes. But they didn't have those tennis shoes the way they do now. They had leather shoes, and also always leather soles. My dad used to repair when they were worn through the leather, you know, it didn't wear like the rubber does now. So that would wear out first, and he'd resole them. You could buy little leather soles, and you'd put them on and trim them so they'd fit. That's why they used shoe shops, or harness shops. You could do that, if you'd wanted to, you could take them to town, but my dad fixed them himself.
Okay. Did you have boots for winter that were bigger?
Overshoes. We didn't have much boots. Once in a while we had a set of boots, but mostly regular shoes and then overshoes, 4-button overshoes, you know, for the deep snow. And
what were the overshoes made out of?
Rubber.
And what are we looking at here?
This is an old post office that was made you started using that in 1884 in the town of Long Lake, which is about 30 miles east of here. And the reason the settlers started in the east end of McPherson County, and so that's why that was earlier than Eureka. Eureka is more on the western end of McPherson County. And so this small one was used in Long Lake. And this one started in 84. And this one was used in Eureka. And that started in 1887 when Eureka got the railroad, and Eureka was named the town of Eureka. And the other one is a later one that came from Ardis. Ardis is west of Eureka again, and that was later. That they claim is the early 1900s. But here we go to 1887 to about 1900s.
How did your family get your mail?
The first thing I remember, I was about 6 years old when we got a mail carrier, a route, when they started delivering mail. And to begin with, they delivered it probably once a week, and then finally twice a week, and then every other day, and then from about 1930 on, I think they went every day. Once they had the cars to drive, better cars to drive, and a little bit better roads too.
What type of mail did your family receive?
Mail? Well, when I grew up real small, we got excited when we got a Sears Roebuck catalog or a Montgomery catalog. And then we had something to order if we could. And that was, we also got the local paper. And for a long time, by the time I was old enough to read, I think we had the Aberdeen paper, daily paper. I think once we had the Daily Mail route, we got the daily paper too.
Did your family ever get any German language newspapers?
Yes, my dad had one German paper that it was called the Rundschau. And he read that, and my mother could read that, and she read that too. My dad could read a little in the paper news, in the English papers. He could get something out of it. But
Did you write any letters to people to send letters out?
Oh yeah, we did. For some reason, the teachers kind of advised us, you know, like we should pick a friend someplace and mail them. At that time, we could mail a letter for 2 cents, you know, and 2 cent stamp. And she advised at least to start writing to somebody we knew that wasn't next door neighbor that we'd see or visit. So teachers, I think the school helped to get us going on that.
Who did you write to? Do you remember?
I really don't remember. I know I wrote letters, but once, you know, I was big enough to remember or started writing to letters. I don't want to mention them. I did write to some girls sometimes.
Okay.
I suppose everybody did, so it's nothing big.
What piece of machinery is this here?
This is a Massey Harris self-propelled combine, and it's a 1948 model. It's one of the earlier self-propelled combines. Earlier they had pull-type combines, which we'll get to a little bit later, but self-propelled, and this was a pretty good machine. They wore those machines out, the self-propelled. They were big enough to do a good job.
Did your family have one of these types of combines?
I did after I was farming. My dad never had a combine. He quit before the combines came around.
Okay. And what is this machine here?
That's a little 6-foot John Deere combine, and that's a pull type. They came out in 6-foot size or 12-foot, and if a farmer bought a 12-foot John Deere, he had a good machine. But those little 6-footers were too small, and most of them were set down in good shape, but they were too small. And they sometimes were able to trade them in on a bigger machine when the bigger machines came out. But they're quite a bit older. I think that's, well, it's not much. I'm not sure what the year on that machine is. Oh, 1951, that's even newer than that one. But they came out, there's some older John Deere machines than this one. This happens to be a 51.
Okay. And what is this machine here?
That's what we call a thrashing machine. And when they started farming, we have a picture here of a horse-drawn power takeoff that was driven by 12 horses in a circle with a power takeoff. And that provided the power to drive the thrashing machine. But that took a small machine. Later on, when the tractors came out, there were a lot of those thrashing machines in the country. And they could even thrash bundles, or they could thrash wheat stacks, loose wheat stacks. The only thing, the bundles they had to haul up to the machine with the wagons, and the wheat stacks, the grain stacks, they had to take the machine up to the stacks and then they pitch it in, the loose wheat, you know, stuff.
Could you describe a typical threshing day on your farm?
Well, thrashing was usually a long, hard day. I remember we'd get up like in the fall, it got dark a little earlier. Thrashing was usually later on because first they had to harvest and then they had to, you know, to some other chops. And by the time they started the thrashing, the days got shorter. But still we'd get up about 5 o'clock in the morning and probably get the horses ready to go, like for pitching bundles. And got breakfast, and by that time it was daylight. And then we'd start thrashing until sundown, which was probably 8 o'clock by that time in the evening.
How many times would you stop to eat?
Well, we stopped to have lunch in the morning, and we had dinner, big dinner. The cooks, they always tried to outdo each other. The big meal. They brought lunch in the afternoon, and then after everything was shut down in the evening and the horses taken care of, and then we went in for supper.
How many people were usually on a threshing crew?
Well, a machine like that took 6 wagons to haul the bundles in, to feed that machine if you had a tractor on there. And that took 6 men. And then it took a man to run the tractor and the machine, 1 or 2. And then it took at least 2 or 3 people to haul the grain home, especially with the wagons. After the trucks, big trucks came out, you know, one guy could probably haul it home. But when they hauled it with those little wagons, that took about 3 wagons to keep the machine running. So that would take 3, and the engineer 5 and 6, take 11, 12 men to run a threshing machine.
Did you have a favorite job on the threshing crew that you liked to do?
Well, when I was smaller, I liked to haul the grain home. But then I wasn't big enough to scoop it off. I put it into an elevator, you know, at a tractor, not a tractor-driven, but an engine-driven elevator, and you had to push it back in the back end. So a wagon load, that was even a pretty hard job to push that all back. But I was big enough to drive the horses, but I didn't have to help yet until I was bigger, older, you know, to push it back. But there was usually somebody at home that was his job. He had a hard job too. Hauling bundles was hard, but that was even harder, I think, to unload, keep that threshing machine going. Because one wagon, if there was 3 wagons, one which probably just got done, and the other wagon would drive up, and he was going all the time too.
Did you have a job that you didn't like to do on the threshing crew?
Well, you know, when the threshing machine, when they line it up with the wind, so that the straw goes out, the dirt goes that way. And then if you're unlucky and get a day that the wind shifts and you're on that side where the dirt goes, you can't change. You can't hardly go and set that machine every time the wind blows, it turns. Because some days it just keeps shifting. So you sometimes were stuck all day in the dirty part, on the wrong side. The other side was okay, because you pitched bundles in from both sides. If you were on the wrong side, you had a tough day. Here we have an incubator. They'd fill these drawers with eggs. And there's a little kerosene heater kept the eggs warm, and they could hatch about 150 chickens. It was one hatch, you know, in about 3 weeks. If you keep the eggs warm, they would hatch. So those little incubators were used in a lot of farms instead of clucks. Some people had clucks and hatched their chickens that way, but the incubators, you could raise more chickens. And clucks, you know, if you had clucks that were good, yeah, it was successful. But many times a cluck would sit on them. All at once he would decide she's not going to sit on that nest no more. And you couldn't make them sit on there if they didn't want to. And those eggs were ruined then. The chickens died. I mean, if the eggs got cold, the chickens died. And that happened so often with the clucks. So when those incubators came out, a lot of farmers didn't fool with the clucks at all.
Whose job was it to load the trays with eggs?
Well, my mother took care of that. We had one. And see these slides here. Oh, yeah, there's a little lever here that this would turn the eggs, so she'd slide them along. Now everything is rusty and sticky, but she would take that and slide, and the whole group of eggs would turn as she slid along. They had to do that in both layers. And she took care of the kerosene, and I guess she didn't trust anybody else probably for a job like that, because she wanted to make sure that was done right.
And what is this piece of machinery over here?
That's what we call a binder. And a binder ties the grain into a bundle. And then there's a carrier on there that'll carry about 5, 6 bundles. And then those bundles are dropped in a row. And then they shock them, probably 2 or 3 of those carriers full into one shock. And after those shocks are dried, they have to set out probably 2, 3 weeks before they thrash them, because it usually got binded a little bit green, so it wouldn't shatter so much. And it would dry out on the bundles. And after they were dry, well, they'd pitch those bundles into a wagon and haul them to the thrashing machine, and that's what the thrashing machine took over.
What was your job using these type of machines?
Well, I remember starting shocking. I didn't like that too well. You had to walk, you had to bend down. It was usually hot. I'd rather haul bundles, because then the weather was better, you know, cooler. It didn't get those hot days like for shocking. And then once you shocked, and then you got thirsty, and the water was on the other end, well, you didn't want to walk back to the other end. It was a problem, shocking. If they were binding in the same field, they would bring the chuck along, and we could go over and get a drink when they passed by. But sometimes the whole field was binded, and then you started shocking those long rows, and you'd work your way down, and then you'd get thirsty and were too far away from the water to walk back. But you still, if it was hot enough, you had to.
All right, Edmund, what are we looking at here?
We're looking at a header, and the header cuts the grain, and it pushes the loose grain up into this box. And when this box gets full, it gets pitched off into stacks, the wheat stacks, and they make big old wheat stacks. And when the wheat was dried up in late fall, they would take the thrashing machine in between 2 wheat stacks, and they'd pitch it in, have about 4 men pitching it into the thrashing machine, and thrash those stacks. And the header was pulled with 4 horses, and the header box was pulled with 2 horses.
What were some of the jobs you had using this machine?
Well, my first job was to drive the horses on a header box. And I was probably about 9, 10 years old when I started driving header box. And the trick was this had to be real close here, or else the grain would fall beside. And if you didn't drive straight enough, and then you naturally got scolded or yelled at from either the guy that was up in the box splitting it around, or the guy on the header saw it. And because those rollers could ride along here, you could ride them on there. We've lifted the elevators so we can walk underneath, but the idea is to have the rollers right on the box and keep it there. But for a young boy, that sometimes was quite a job when he started. After a few days, why, you caught on to drive right, the right way.
How did the older men treat you when you worked with them?
Oh, they sometimes yelled at me, if it would fall on the ground, they would get my attention, but they didn't treat me bad or anything.
Okay. And what's this piece of machinery right here?
This is one of the earlier drills to seed wheat, and that was pulled with 4 horses. And there's just a little grain box on there. Like that box would probably hold 3 bushels of wheat. Nowadays they have boxes that hold up to 100 bushels of wheat. Of course, you have those big outfits too.
Where would your family get the seed to plant?
Oh, we kept our own wheat and seeded our own wheat. But sometimes, I know my dad did and I did too. If a new variety came out, we'd probably buy, usually it was high priced, we'd buy 10 bushels or so, and then keep that seed. And if it was good, better wheat, well, we'd go to the better wheat. And even if wheat was, you thought that's real good wheat, in a few years there was a better variety again. More smut resistant, more heat resistant, and They improved the wheat right along over the years.
Where did you buy these new and improved varieties of wheat?
Well, we usually I bought it mostly from the Crop Improvement Association. They got new varieties in, and then they pass out, you know, they wouldn't sell the whole works to one farmer. They'd sell maybe, well, you could probably buy more, but it was expensive, so you worked your way into it by keeping the seed. Because if you had 10 acres and had a crop, well, you had enough wheat to, quite a bit of wheat, and then the next year you'd have a lot more.
Okay.
And here we have what they call a stove dolly. They drive underneath those big wood stoves, and that's controllable here. When they drove under it, and they could lock it in here, and then they could wheel them. They could wheel the stoves on the wooden floors in the kitchen or on the wagon. It's called an old stove dolly.
And what do we have here?
Here we have a meat grinder that grinds the beef or pork, whatever you have, and into hamburger, and then they made sausages. And these are some of the older sausage stuffers. I had never seen those being used, but this one I've used myself, and they still use them around here.
What types of spices would your family put into the sausage?
Where?
When your family made sausage, what types of spices would they put into the sausage?
Well, they put in salt and pepper and garlic. Salt and pepper and garlic. I don't think they used much else. Maybe they did. Some of them. Some people made it different, but those were the main ingredients. Those three things had to be in, and some could probably make it. As the years went by, they probably added some stuff that was better.
Do you remember the procedure of your family making sausage? Like, could you describe a typical day of making sausage for your family?
Well, they would probably end up grinding, at least a half a tubful of hamburger like that. And then from the early days, they didn't weigh it. They guessed and put a handful. I know that put 2 hands full of salt in, 1 handful of pepper, and then they had probably a quart of garlic in a quart jar, and they poured the juice from the garlic. They didn't put the garlic in, but the juice. And then they mixed it, and then finally they tasted it, and many of them knew about how many handsful to start out with, and we got pretty close to the right amount. Sometimes they had to add a little, but later on they would weigh the tub, and then they'd weigh the meat and know how many pounds, and they scaled it according to that, and had something to measure the salt, something to measure the pepper and the garlic. I think they just poured the juice in from a quart jar.
What did they store the ground beef in?
The ground sausage. They smoked it for one thing, and that helped the cold. And in the wintertime, they could keep it out in the smokehouse, and it would freeze, and it would keep pretty good. But a lot of it was canned, especially if it got into the summer or what they figured would last into the summer, because the summer that wouldn't keep no place. I mean, there was no freezers or anything. So they canned a lot, the sausage.
Did your family butcher and make sausage with anyone else, or did you do it by yourselves?
My dad and my older brothers, they lived close together. They worked together. I mean, Like my dad and the older brothers helped the brother on this farm and helped the brother on the other farm, and the brothers helped my dad.
Typically, how many animals would you butcher to make
How
sausage?
many pigs? Well, it depended on the size of family. I remember probably butchering 2 or 3 pigs at a time. And like a young family, if there was only 2 people, they'd probably butcher 1 pig at a time. And they usually, like in the spring, they would butcher a pig if they had a pig ready to butchering, and then they'd have to can it. They knew they had to can it. But in the fall, they could probably butcher 2 or 3 and keep the meat, a bigger family.
What are these machines right here used for?
These are used for washing, and they are without motors, so they're hand operated. And you know, it was a lot of hard work to do their washing. This one even, we've been demonstrating, and that works pretty good. It sure beats just with a washboard, you know. This is even harder work. But then later on, the Maytacs came out, and out in the farm where there was no electricity, they had gasoline motors. And so those Maytac machines had motors to do the washing. So that was a big part of the washing shop.
Who was in charge of washing the clothes at your house?
The ladies, the mother and the sisters. It was really a ladies' shop, really. But those hand-operated machines, we had one like that round top there, and with a handle. And I know I got stuck doing that a lot before we had a Maytag. I think I was probably about 10 years old when we got a Maytag with a gasoline motor, and then that I didn't have to help. But that you had to push back and forth. And
how often did your mom do laundry?
well, at least once a week, and maybe depending on, I think during the hot season of the year, you know, the clothes would get dirty faster, like during harvesting and so. And they probably washed in between sometimes.
Where did you get the water for the washing?
Well, we had a well real close to the house, just for the house, and we had to carry it in. And then they heated it on kind of a copper boiler. We don't have a copper boiler out here. We have one in the building there, but that put a big copper boiler and that heat that up, and it's the water they used.
Okay.
This is what we call a hay puller. They'd push that into the hay, and that would bring some hay out of a big stack, or even in a hay loft where the hay was piled up high, and those hip roof barns, and they used those hay pullers to get the hay started, to get some of it off. These were the skates when I went to school. These were bought. We had a teacher that had skates like that, and he used them. We had a lake right by the country schoolhouse, and he used those clip-ons. But all of the boys that went to the country school had homemade skates like that. There's wire on the bottom, and used it with a stick with a nail, and we went like a skier. And I know our teachers spent a lot of time clipping on, and they'd come off. Sometimes if the lake was rough, or he'd often sit down and work on his skates, and we could keep on skating. With these, we had no problem. But these were probably better. There were no shoe skates in those days. But these are old clip-ons, so they'd clip them onto the shoes.
How often did you get a ice skate at school?
Get to go ice skating at school. Well, at recess time, and noon hour was the longest. We had a noon hour, and we'd eaten, and we could spend when the ice was right, you know, no snow on it, we'd spend the time on the lake.
What other games would you play for recess?
Oh, in school, well, we played baseball, and we played hide and go seek, you know. One guy would be it, and the others would hide in a rock pile or behind the barn or behind the schoolhouse. And then whoever would get up, you know, like hide and go seek, and get to what we call the home plate. If you got there before he did, I mean, if the guy that was it got there before you did, and then you were it. And that's how they changed off.
Did you speak German or English when you played your games outside?
Well, if the teacher was outside, we talked English. We had to. But otherwise, we spoke German and English mixed sometimes. But if we knew that the teacher was within earshot, we had to speak English, which was good and right.
Would you get in trouble if the teacher caught you speaking German?
Well, the teacher would probably tell us to, and I don't know if anybody really got into trouble account of it, but we were warned about it.
Okay. And what do we have here?
These are called traction blocks. And if they got stuck in the days of the Model T, they put those under the hind wheels. And this is kind of round here, so it's easy to slip on for the wheel. And if they get on those tracks, they'd sometimes get out of the mud hole. I mean, if they got a new start, I mean, this was enough to get them going again. And they date way back to the days of Model T.
All right, Edmund, what building are we in right now?
We are in a building which we call the country church. And it's a small, a building like the old country churches were, about small size, and later on some of the country churches were large and a much bigger building and much better building. But this is really one of the early country churches. And when we got the building, it was bare, it was empty. So we advertised in the local paper what we need. And we got this big chair here from the Lutheran church here in Eureka. And this pulpit here we got from the Reformed church, country church, out in the country church that I went to. And the organ we got from the Leola area, and it was a country church and the Presbyterian church. And the benches we got from the Artist area, and they were from the Methodist and the Baptist churches. There were two benches from each one. They're a little bit different. Each one is a little bit different. And we got this song board here where they put the old numbers on there from the Congregational church. And this here communion tray we got from the Methodist church. And here we have a gal that's wearing a confirmation dress, and the gal that's pictured here is actually wearing the dress when she got confirmed. They usually got confirmed when they were 14, 15 years old. And then here we have a picture of a couple that was the first wedding we had in this country church. They wanted an old-fashioned wedding, and the lady was from the Britain area, which is about 100 miles from here, but she happened to be working in the nursing home here and found out about this country church. And she called me in the wintertime when we were closed whether I'd open the museum for her. And it was quite of a nice day, and I said, sure, I could open up. And I told her, it's going to be cold. Oh, I don't care, she said, it's cold. And then when I met her out here, she says, can you open the country church? She didn't even want to see the museum. I wasn't interested. And she looked it over and she says, could I have a wedding in there? And I says, well, we've had this building for about 3 years and we've been waiting for a couple that would like to get married in here. She sure can. So they had an old-fashioned wedding, everything the old-fashioned way, and had horse and buggy, and so, and as much as I know, this is at least 10 years or 15 years already. The couple are still married, so they were serious.
How often did your family go to church?
How often? Well, we went on a Sunday. We just had Sunday service. Oh, once in a while. There was probably some holidays, like, in the spring, Easter time, there were some holidays that they had churches, maybe one or two.
Were the services usually in German or English?
Oh, our country church, that was in the German language until for a long time. I grew up, as far as Sunday school, everything was English, German.
And what do you have there in your hands?
This is one of the trays that they would have in some of the country churches. You know, they could reach over on the pews like that and pass it around. And then some of the churches had a basket they passed around. And then some of them had a stand like you're standing there, a wooden box with where we could throw the money in, a little door on there would be locked. And when they'd walk out, they'd throw the money in.
What were the seating arrangements like when you went to church?
What was what?
What were the seating arrangements when you went to church? Where did people sit?
Oh, the country church I went to, we didn't even have benches. We had chairs. We had well, they were wooden chairs. Let's see, we don't even have a chair like that in here. No. We had a few of these wooden chairs, but we had a newer style too. But we just had a few of those in our country church. And the others were made like the early chairs. So we didn't have benches in our country church. But a lot of country churches had benches.
When you were a child, where did you sit in church?
Well, when I was small, we had to sit with our parents. But after we got to Sunday school, we could sit, you know, like we usually had the Sunday school on the front area. And the school children would sit on the front bench, pupils, you know. And boys on one side, we had 2 rows. And the ladies on the other side, they had an alley. Usually country churches were a little bit bigger. Ours was bigger enough to have 2 rows of chairs. And I would sit on the boys' side in the front church. And I remember one time, I and another guy started whispering, talking. All at once, the other guy, he was my uncle. Boom! I got a book, a church, a songbook on my head, and so did that other guy. And that wasn't bad. It was embarrassing. But when we got home, then my dad said, Dad, he doesn't want to see no more that, you know, my uncle has to see that I behave in church. And I think after that I behaved pretty good. Yeah, we forgot about the preacher and were busy talking. And when he saw that, he was an elder, I guess. And at that time, they didn't care whether it was your child or not. They just took care of everybody, anybody. Nowadays, I think they'd gotten sued.
And what building is this that we are in now?
This is an old country school, one of the earlier buildings. And they were small, a one-room schoolhouse, it's called. And they were teaching 8 grades. One teacher to 8 grades. And sometimes a little building like this was crowded when they had up to 25 children in one little schoolroom. And the teacher had quite a job with teaching 8 grades and different, all 8 classes, you know. So she usually had some of the 7th or 8th graders, if a student was doing fairly well, excuse me, that got caught up with his studies, she'd have them help them and teach some of the lower grades. So that helped the teacher a lot. And I think it also was a good experience for those 7th or 8th graders to be working with the younger students.
What subjects were you taught when you went to school?
What was that?
What subjects were you taught when you went to school?
Well, we had the basic subjects like language and arithmetic, writing, reading, and geography. And I believe when you got to the upper grades in grade school, you'd probably have civics, if I remember right.
What was your favorite subject?
My favorite subject was arithmetic. I was good in that, and so evidently I liked it, and then I got good at it. I didn't like drawing. We also had drawing. I didn't like drawing, and I never got good. And I didn't care too much for writing, and I never got to be a good writer either. I think if you like something, you'll get good at it. Arithmetic I just loved. And I know, like, when I was in the 8th grade, we went to a neighboring school, and there were 8th graders in that school. And when they like problems, I got the problems, and the others, some of them liked to copy, but sometimes they got caught. And I wouldn't give them my copies, because then I'd be in trouble too. But some of them would walk by and stop there and start reading how I copied it, and they got caught. And
what was their punishment when they got caught?
Well, if they got caught with copying, that was quite serious. I mean, they probably had to stay in for recess and do some extra work. That was usually their punishment.
What did you bring to school to eat for lunch?
I didn't get that.
What type of foods did you bring to school for lunch to eat?
Oh, to food?
Yeah.
Well, we carried the syrup pails instead of a lunch pail. Some people later on had regular lunch pails, but we carried a big syrup pail, empty one. And that was filled with bread or sandwiches, and if we were lucky, we probably had an apple, and it was mostly, we liked syrup, and I know I ate a lot of syrup bread at school. Probably butter on syrup, and there wasn't, maybe cookies sometimes. If there were cookies available, we could take a cookie along, and apple, or grapes at the season, grapes. We had grapes.
What was the attendance like at your school?
Is what?
Did all the kids show up every day at school? Did the kids show up at school every day?
Oh yes, most of them had good attendance. You know, some of them were sick sometimes, but otherwise I think there was good attendance. When I started school as a first grader, and at that time the older boys could stay home for work in the fall of the year, but they kind of laid the law down rougher. They couldn't miss more than so many days for work. I mean, sickness, there was no limit probably if they still made their grade. But you couldn't keep on keeping you had to go to school either past the 8th grade or be 18 years old.
Could you tell us a little bit about the telephone that's on the wall over there?
Yeah, this school, when we got this school building, it was bought, a fellow bought it complete with everything in that was in, the stove state, the teacher's desk, the maps, the blackboard, and the pictures of Abraham Lincoln and of George Washington, and a lot of the books. And some of the little things like a quilt and that was added, but it stayed complete the way the school was. And for some reason, this schoolhouse had a phone. So that was great, because I know when our school was in the middle of nowhere, there was no farm closer than a mile about. And if something went wrong, say somebody got sick or something, well, somebody had to run to that place and let them know that they could get to whoever got sick, or if an accident or anything, or the weather, snowstorm come up. Well, the teacher would then know what to do, whether you keep them there until they come, or this way. Sometimes we were left, the school, when it got too bad, it left out as early, but none of the farmers knew that school would be out early either, or else they'd come. Once in a while, if the farmer thought, well, it's too bad, I'm going to go and pick my school up, the teachers released them as they came and picked them up in a blizzard. But a phone was great if there would have been a phone. But in our school, there was no telephone line going by, and so there was no phone there. And very few had a phone in this county at that time. Sure was nice if they had a phone.
All right, Edmund, what building is this?
This is what we call a clay brick house. When I say clay brick house, it's a little different than a sod house. A sod house, they plowed the prairie and they cut the strips of sod and used the grass and everything. And with that, they could put up a wall of a building in one day. But those clay bricks like we have there, those had to be put in forms and dried, and they had to use clay, because black dirt would not stick. And the clay blocks, that's like cement almost. The clay, after it dries, it sticks together. And so this is a clay brick house. And that was built in 1886. And the farmer had it covered with wooden sidings. We have a picture there, what it looked like. And when we got a hold of the blocks, the sidings were taken off, and then it just started falling apart. 2 walls were still up when we drove up with the truck, loaded them and reset them here, and picked up the broken clay that was in pieces to smear. And it's like cement work. Some of the bricklayers did the job of setting this up, this clay brick house. But mostly when the people homesteaded, when they first came, they put up a sod house. That was grass and everything, because they had to have shelter right away, and so that they could put up real fast. This would take quite a while to make all those clay blocks and get a home ready for them. But once they had a shelter, and then they could do that.
What type of house did you grow up in? What was it made out of?
I grew up in a wooden house, and that was a fairly big home, a 2-story building. And the house is still out there. My son is farming on it now. I farmed on that home while I was farming. And that had I think it had that was a 4-bedroom home. Of course, we had a large family. And in some rooms, we probably had 3 beds, where we boys had a big room, and I think we had 3 beds in there. Of course, there were 6 of us sleeping in there.
What did you use to heat the house?
From 1926 on, I was only 6 years old, and then they put a water-type heating furnace, you know, the radiators, those old steel radiators, and that was a good way of heating it. My son is still heating it that way, only now he uses propane, you know, but we used coal, and then I used later on when fuel was reasonable, and we used fuel for a long time. But now he changed into propane. It's probably cleaner heat and a little cheaper than fuel. Fuel is, oh, that's just unbelievable, the price of fuel now.
And how did some of the earlier pioneers heat their houses?
When they first came here, they had hay cut, something like this, and they would twist it in tight rolls, a little bigger bunch, and twisted it and fed the stoves. The first year they came here, my dad said they heated the house with twisted hay. And then the second year they were able to pick buffalo chips. You know, there were no cow chips, you know, because they had one cow, well, that wouldn't go no place. Buffalo chips were scattered around the country because there were a lot of buffaloes here roaming the country. They picked them, and then later on, when they got into the cattle business and had more cows, they picked cow chips, and that helped along. When that was dry, there was no smell to it, and it burned real good. It heated the home. Or even corn cobs, when they fed corn to the pigs, you know, that they leave the cobs like that. And those cobs burned real good. And they helped with that. And then in the winter time, or if they didn't buy, during the 30s especially, I remember they packed manure, that they packed that with the horses and spaded it out like that. And when it was good and dry, they burned that, and they used that mostly at night for the night. They'd fill up the furnace at night to keep the house warm. And then later on, they used lignite coal. And once we had the furnace, I mean, my dad bought coal, and they started with lignite coal, but they weren't the best coal. They were burned away so fast. Those Montana coal were kind of a hard coal, and if you put a chunk in like that, the house would be warm in the morning.
Okay. If you could, I just wondered if you could answer a few questions for us about your childhood. What was your most stressful childhood experience?
What do you mean, as far as work?
Just anything in general. What was the most stressful period of your childhood?
Stressful. I can't think of any real problems that I know of that even say, well, this or that was a problem. As a family, we grew up together. We learned to get along together, and I don't know of any problems.
Okay. What was your happiest childhood memory?
Well, anytime we could go visiting, or neighbors came, we had a night of entertainment.
Okay. What was the most adventurous thing you did in your childhood?
Most stretches?
Adventurous.
Oh, adventures. Well, we didn't get away from the farm too much, but many times there were things we were doing that we shouldn't have done. Like I remember in the wintertime when our folks were gone, we'd go up on the barn and there was snow on the roof, and we would take the sled and go down to the snowbank. And that was fine. That sled went down straight and into the snowbank, and we had a lot of fun. All at once, my older brother got the idea. We had kind of a penthouse that was about 4 feet high. if he'd go up there with the sled, so it would jump down, he'd get more speed. And he did try it, and went up there and lost control and went down the side where there was no snow. And then he laid there, and that was the end of our barn sledding. I mean, he was able to, he wasn't hurt bad enough, so nobody even found out about it. But some of the things we got, I'm surprised that we were still around to talk about.
All right. Are there any other childhood memories that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I remember one of my brothers, it was such a stormy day, he talked about flying. He thinks he could fly. If he tie grain sacks on him, and he had, I think he had 4 or 5 grain sacks, and he thought if he'd go up on the granary and then jump down, he could fly. And he finally did jump that way, but he went down on the ground, and he only jumped once.
All right. Any other stories you'd like to share with us?
Let's see if I could think of any of them. Oh, in the schoolhouse, we had a barn, and we weren't supposed to go up, but if the teacher was inside and there was no window on the north side and the barn was behind the schoolhouse, so we went up and we'd jump into it was quite a jump into the snowbank. The snowbank usually was a ways away from the building. And one morning I went up, and I mean, we had done that many mornings, but that morning the roof was frosty. And I slipped when I wanted to jump, and I went down on the bare ground. But the barn wasn't too high. It probably was, high enough to put horses in, maybe 10 feet or so. But that hard ground, that hurt, because I fell down.
All right. Are there any other experiences you'd like to share with us?
Golly, let me think. I know, like, we'd break the young horses, and usually if there was snow, we'd take them into the deep snow, and that was, helped a lot. If you would get bucked off, you had snow to go, and they couldn't buck as hard, so you could break them faster. We broke them that way. But sometimes, I know I got bucked off on hard ground too, in the summertime. I mean, most horses I could ride and break them, but once in a while, one time I got a hold of one that was a real rodeo horse. They said that jumped, and that left its hoofs in that hard ground prairie where it came down, and I went down with that jump. Oh, that was a wild one. Nobody else tried to ride it after that. And I tried it once. And he wasn't wild otherwise, but you got on him, and he got up in the air.
All right. Why do you think it's important to tell your story?
Well, a lot of those things, I think it was entertainment for the young people on the farm that they enjoyed, and I can't recall anybody in our neighborhood that really didn't live to tell about it. So even if you got hurt sometimes a little bit, but if you could help it, nobody found out about it. Because all that was done when the parents went visiting or went to town to do their shopping. Because those young boys had to get into some kind of trouble. And I think it would be the same way now if they wouldn't have everything else to do, and yet they're bored. They can have everything that you can buy, and yet they find. I know I have my grandkids. There's nothing to do. That kind of bothers me when they have those ideas. And they have toys that you can't get into a room, nothing to do.
Are there any other thoughts or observations that you'd like to share with us today?
Well, I don't mind sharing any of them, but I don't know if I could think of any of them really that would be interesting either right now. Tomorrow I'd probably think of some. Today I don't know. I think we've got a long tape there, and probably the most important things have been said.
Okay.
But if you have anything you're interested in, this was our way of making popcorn on those hot cook stoves. When the stove was good and hot, we had to shake it and then it would pop.
All right, Edmund, I'd like to thank you very much for showing us around the beautiful Eureka Pioneer Museum. So on behalf of me and the Germans from Russia Heritage Collection, thank you very much.
You're certainly welcome. I was glad to do it.